right, Tom? Talking about the New Deal, right? FDR's first term, 23.1. Objective is to learn about the early actions taken by the Roosevelt administration. How did the New Deal try to combat the Depression? Like Hoover tried these things, and after 4 years of Hoover really doing nothing, America was ready for a new approach, and that's why FDR is going to be it.
And one thing we want to keep in mind is that with Hoover, remember, he believed in this idea of no direct relief, rugged individualism. Now, over time, in 1931 and into 1932, Hoover realized that that approach wasn't really working, and he began to expand the size of the government to try to help however he could, but it was unsuccessful. And then with the gassing of the bonus army, we know that entering the election in 1932, Herbert Hoover is at a huge disadvantage. And even the Republican Party knew that, but they didn't have anyone better to offer. Unfortunately for Herbert Hoover, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a very popular, reform-minded, two-term governor of New York, ran for president for the Democratic Party. And as you can see by the map pictured right here, the Democratic Party voted for FDR heavily, as did many other Republicans in the United States of America. And FDR wins in a landslide over Herbert Hoover. It isn't often that you see incumbent presidents lose this badly. Another time would be in 1980 when Ronald Reagan beats Jimmy Carter. But it only happens a few times in American history where an incumbent loses to a newcomer.
You basically need an economic crisis.
Yeah. You need people to be very desperate and very angry.
And spraying veterans with poison gas doesn't help either.
Yeah, that's very true. So what we have is beginning with FDR's presidency. So there's actually like 4 months in between when FDR is elected president and when he takes over, is inaugurated as president. And actually what we end up doing is passing the 20th Amendment. Now it didn't kick in for FDR, but for all future presidents, they're going to change that window from November to March, when you sort of have like a lame duck president and the guy who's already been fired still working for 4 months. Now they get inaugurated in January. And with transportation, communication, the efficiency of it, you don't need 4 months to gather your cabinet. But everyone was on pins and needles to see what FDR would do when he finally was inaugurated president.
Yeah, and he didn't actually help Hoover at all in that kind of period. He actually had refused to really work with the administration as that. So that was kind of, they wanted him in. They wanted Hoover out a lot faster.
Yeah, and
this was a disaster.
Yeah, and the worst part is the economy became worse in those 4 months. So people were really desperate for FDR to get in. And once he got in, he and his team, the Brain Trust is what they were nicknamed, his advisors hit the ground running, and they rolled out this 100 Days program, in which basically the first 3+ months of his presidency, he passed a huge amount of legislation to immediately try and pump life back into the American economy and into the American society.
And these new programs that are kind of unveiled in 100 days basically fall under these 3 umbrellas. Right? Relief, direct relief for the needy, economic recovery, trying to build up the economy back, and then financial reform, right? Reform some of the practices and laws that got us into this mess in the first place.
So what we're looking for here is really short-term, right? Short and long-term, and then long-term. So FDR wants to make sure he fixes the problems we were facing in the moment, but also make sure that the changes he makes last for the long term. So what are some things he does? Well, the first thing he does, which is pretty controversial, is he passes the Emergency Banking Relief Act, in which he shuts down all the banks in the United States of America and tells them they can no longer operate until they have inspectors go into the bank and verify that the bank is not insolvent, which means they can pay back their debts. Basically, to verify that the bank can open up again. And what's really important here, and what's extremely crucial to understand about FDR's approach, is that the American people had lost trust. They lost trust in the banking system. They lost trust in the government. They lost trust in the stock market. They lost trust in themselves. They just lost faith in what had made America great again. And FDR recognized unless he gets the banks back going again, then the economy will never pick up.
You just said make America great again. Are you hinting at your vote that you
No, I'm just saying he did want to make America great again.
And actually, one way he kind of gets the American public sold him this bank holiday, which again is a massive government intervention in the economy that America has never really seen before, is the fireside chats. He's going to do this throughout his presidency, but it's his first one, a few days after he's president, basically to explain what he's doing in the bank holiday. And he's really kind of a master of media in the way he does this with radio, right? This time, I mean, what you did if you go home today and you watch your favorite television shows, back then you would go home and you would listen to your favorite radio programs. And everyone would kind of sit around and listen to the radio. FDR would give these national radio addresses. And the first one, which sounds really boring, he basically just goes on there and explains how banks work. And, but he's very friendly, he's very kind of collegial. He doesn't talk above people, he kind of talks very kind of slow and very easy to understand. It makes people kind of feel very comfortable with him and what he's doing. I mean, this is the first time a president's really ever done this, and done this regularly. And this is something that actually really endears the American public to FDR, the fact that he comes into their home regularly and kind of explains what he's doing, explains what he's thinking, and how he's feeling about these things.
And what's so great about the fireside chats is exactly what Mr. Manelsky mentioned, in that FDR basically, he was very reductionist, right? He reduced a very complex banking system into a simple, easy to understand explanation. Because many Americans were extremely afraid. They were afraid, they were confused, they didn't understand how such a fantastically wealthy country had fallen on such hard times. And FDR basically broke down exactly what happened with the banking system and why, and helped people understand it. And then once they can understand it, they're much more willing to put their money back in the banks once again, which was vital to get the economy going again. But to make sure they trusted the banks again, Congress passed, with his urging, the Glass-Steagall Banking Act of 1933. And the most important part of this act is it creates the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And what the government is saying is that don't be afraid to put your money in the bank. We will actually insure up to $5,000 of your money. So even if you lose it, we're good for it. And if you go to a drive-thru in a bank today, you'll see little FDIC stickers on the window of the bank. If you don't, you should find a new bank. And what it means today is the same thing. It still insures all of your money, except now instead of $5,000 because of inflation, it's $250,000.
Right, and we talked about this, one of the major issues was the run on the banks and people going and running and trying to get all their money out of the banks, which banks were failing, and if your bank failed, you lost all your money. This way, that doesn't happen. Your life savings isn't going to disappear if there's a run on the banks because of the FDIC. All right, and you also have the Federal Securities Act, which sets up the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, which is basically going to be the regulatory body of Wall Street and investments, right? And it's kind of going to make sure that they're not doing the things that they were doing before the stock market crash, which caused the Great Depression, or one of the many reasons.
And so now different companies, they can't manipulate their stocks to make a profit. They have to be very open and public about what they're pricing their stocks at. So this stuff is really important moving forward, because the big picture here with all of this is FDR needed to create trust again. Whether it's trusting the bank again, trusting the government, or trusting the stock market. The United States of America had to buy in to the system that made us so great to begin with, so he can make America great again.
It's like a time. Yeah. Right? Relief, kind of basic Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, the AAA Act was just all this money kind of thrown at farmers, right? Loans for mortgages, direct payments for poor farmers, help struggling farmers, right? Basically trying to get the farm economy back on its feet, right? Because that had been struggling throughout the 1920s and was hit especially hard with the Dust Bowl. Right, this act is designed to basically really prop up the American farming sector, which is a pretty important engine of the American economy at the time.
And remember, we talked about how there were 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. The first thing, the short-term goal, FDR is going to provide relief, so this is one of the ways he does it. Additionally, another way, which was actually his brainchild, he loved this, the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps, in which they would hire males about 18 to 30 years old to go out and plant trees and prevent soil erosion and build parks and basically do things outdoors. They'd actually pay the men, but $25 to $30 of their monthly paycheck would go to the family. So they're working so their family can continue to eat and live and not default on all their loans, hopefully. So these are some types of things they're doing to relieve the people. Additionally, the unemployed gets the National Industrial Recovery Act.
And this is going to be sweeping legislation that is going to do a ton of stuff for the economy, and especially the industrial economy. Right? It's going to establish codes and laws and these different regulations for businesses on unionization, on child labor, kind of set price controls, product controls, wage controls. It's going to guarantee rights of unions. It's going to guarantee collective bargaining. It's going to guarantee uninterrupted union activity in a business, which are these kind of major reforms that never really existed before and are going to be quite controversial and maybe unconstitutional in a couple people's minds. But this is the goal here is to reform and help the industrial sector of the economy recover.
And one thing we want to keep in mind throughout all of this is that even though FDR and Congress are passing all of these pieces of legislation and doing all of this incredibly new stuff, that doesn't mean everyone's on board with it. And FDR actually had quite a few critics, conservatives and liberals alike. Conservatives argue that he is doing far too much and expanding his power unconstitutionally. Sound familiar? And liberals argue that he's not doing enough and he needs to do even more.
Sounds like a great moment for a populist firebrand out in the South. Right?
There you go. So you have a lot of opposition to the New Deal. And the first opposition we'll talk about is the Supreme Court.
This comes in the court packing scandal, right? So the Supreme Court finds the AAA Act, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, unconstitutional, finds the NIRA unconstitutional, finds a lot of other things that kind of went along with a lot of the New Deal unconstitutional. And FDR doesn't like that because this is his signature legislation, this is his plan, so he believes he can get the economy back on good track. And again, we remember the Supreme Court has life terms. And FDR's like, oh, they're a bunch of old guys that they shouldn't be there in the first place. They can't handle the workload. So I'm going to appoint 6 new judges, one judge for every judge over 72, that will allow me to keep a lot of young, fresh judges on the Supreme Court that are going to handle the workload of the Supreme Court in the modern world. The problem with that is it's not going to look too great to the American public.
Yeah, and not only that, but one thing we need to keep in mind with the checks and balances in our government is Congress is the one that technically passes the law that controls the amount of justices on the Supreme Court. So FDR comes up with this idea to do it, but FDR can't do it. And the Supreme Court was striking down his acts because they said he was acting like a legislator when he's not, and he was doing things that state government should be doing. So those are if you were wondering why they were unconstitutional, those are the reasons why. So FDR basically proposes this idea to Congress. Hey, we should appoint new justices. And he says that it was for, depending on age, and he wanted it to be more efficient, but everyone saw right through it. His motives were very transparent. He wanted to keep pushing his ideas, and he didn't want the Supreme Court to get in the way. This was an extremely negative reaction to this. Congress refused to do it. Court packing scheme fails, and FDR, by far the biggest black eye of his presidency, is when he fails to get Congress to increase the number of justices. We good? I think we're good. Right. So moving on to, if the clicker would work, there it is. Moving on to other
opposition.
Yes, thank you. Moving on to other opposition to the New Deal. So we have the American Liberty League, which is conservative, and then these 3 guys are liberal.
So very conservative, thinks that the government's doing too much. Huey Long right here is the governor of Louisiana and is from the left, right? So he's a populist. He comes up with the Share Our Wealth campaign, right? He's basically wants to really radically redistribute wealth, like a guaranteed minimum income for people, basically really soaking it to the rich. He's also beloved. He gets in a big bar fight in Louisiana for peeing on a guy in the bathroom. This is a senator of the United States, which that damaged him for a while, but he came back after that and was ready to run for president against FDR in 1936, but was assassinated before that could happen. Father Charles Coughlin was a priest operating out of Detroit. He had a radio program that was very popular. he was very much on like the bimetallism. You remember that from the populist era, bringing more silver into the money supply, kind of creating an easier way for government to kind of increase the amount of money for people, lowering prices. His fall from grace happens when it realized that he had his secretary buy lots and lots and lots of stock in silver under her name with his money. So he had a lot of personal gain if silver became part of the money supply. And Dr. Francis Townsend.
You take it away. You're doing a good job.
You had it. You seem like you wanted it.
No, I know.
Dr. Francis Townsend was kind of another very populist, kind of wanted more direct relief, more kind of direct wealth going there. And he was also a big supporter of what will eventually become the Social Security, a direct payments to elderly, to unemployed, to disabled, before FDR is going to do that himself.
So what we see here overall is that there are critics on both sides of the aisle with FDR. And you have your American Liberty League and the conservatives. They said the government's getting too big and it's impinging on the rights of the individuals. And then you have your liberals who are saying FDR is not going far enough. Overall, though, the American people seem to be pretty happy. But the New Deal's effects have a very temporary shelf life. And what we'll see in 23-2, FDR, in order to pump production back into the economy and society, when this production starts to plateau, he'll pass a second New Deal. And so FDR will continue to pass legislation throughout his presidency to try and keep things going with very mixed results, which of course we'll talk about throughout the chapter. Anything else?
All right, nothing else. Thanks for watching. Make sure to ask your teacher if you have any questions.
English is hard.